Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Edu-on-Air webinar where we'll be looking at practical approaches to SEND learning from Abingdon House. My name is Grace, and my role at Google is lead on digital transformation. So what that means is I work with schools and local government and national governments where they're already using Google and helping them get the most out of what they're doing, but also most importantly, learning from our community. So today I have Peter Reeves, who is the digital education lead at Abingdon House, and Mason Thornton, a student at Abingdon House and our first ever student guest on one of our webinars. So welcome to you both, and I'm going to pass over to you to intro yourselves a little more.
Hi there, I'm Peter Reeves. I am Digital Education Lead at Abingdon House School. I've worked there for 9 years and been involved in SEND education for 9 years plus now. We're going to be looking at our approach using technology and Google especially to help support our learners and help remove barriers to their learning. Mason.
Hi, I'm Mason. I was a Abingdon House student for around 7 years. I went there when I was in year 7 and I left when I was in year 12. I have a lot of very good, fond memories about Abingdon, and I had a very big growth and experience with them. And I feel like without them, I don't think I'll be where I am today.
Oh, amazing. Already an amazing start to the webinar. I'm so excited to learn more from you both today. So Peter, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Abingdon House School?
Yeah, so we are a special educational needs school set in Marylebone in central London. We have students ranging from 7 to 19, all with a wide profile of need. We have students with ADHD, autism, SPLD, and although we are a private school, we are largely local authority funded. We're part of Cavendish Education, who are an independent specialist education group with day and boarding schools and colleges.
Amazing. And Peter, so tell us a little bit more about your approach. So we can imagine that, you know, a lot of your students arrive at Abingdon House School maybe with a bit of educational trauma, coming from a school where their needs weren't met, or maybe they didn't have a diagnosis. So how do you overcome these barriers to learning and engagement that your students might face, especially if they have more of a negative relationship with learning?
Yeah, great question. We're going to really focus on the technology element today, but that is only part of what we do. We are a specialist provision and we run a mainstream style education. So our students are set for English and maths. We run qualifications that range from GCSEs, functional skills and vocational subjects. The timetable is split up so students transition between lessons, have form groups. We also set with a mixture of social and academic ability in mind. One of the massive things we do, though, is our integrated therapies. We have in-house therapists for speech and language and occupational therapists, and they don't just sit in isolation. They really underpin our approach. So they will run staff trainings, they will run drop-ins, and they run sessions and lessons, as well as their therapies. That means that the approaches that they use are completely integrated within the school. So things like zones of regulation or social thinking programs, the language used in those are used by all of our teachers, all of our TAs, even all of our admin staff are aware of the language we use with students and the approaches we use. And that means we really have a holistic approach when we're looking at a student's needs. We do have high staff ratios. We've got 10 forms. We have 15 teachers, some of those form tutors, some of those specialist tutors. We have a number of Senkos. And that all helps just really meet the needs of our students with such a diverse needs. And the school environment is very much trauma informed, as you said. We have positive behaviour systems, and all of those systems that we have in place run throughout all of the school. They're not used in isolation.
Amazing. And it sounds so you've got a really human-centered approach from the strategies for your students to just really like the people on the ground and the setup of your environment. So with that in mind, how did you successfully sort of deploy your pedagogical strategy with like a digital first priority?
Yeah, so I think the real key to that is our students were at the heart of it at all points. At no point did we lay down a plan that said we're going to go one-to-one devices. At no point did we lay down a plan and say we're going to move over to Google Classroom being our standard way of working in isolation. It was very much how the students were working, our students were adapting and using those technologies that drove our vision and our pedagogy for what we should be doing in the class. So we were one-to-one devices pre-COVID, which I think is reasonably rare sometimes. I think a lot of people started that journey afterwards, but we went in with that support and structure. We'd highlighted that our students work better through digital methods. So we used Google Classroom as our main way of delivering work. Now that is across our school, all work needs to be set on Google Classroom, so all students can access it with their various accessibility needs. Google Drive meant that we could actually just compile all our work centrally. It made it easier for things like EHCPs and IEPs to be edited because there was one central document that everyone could dive into. A hidden gem is using a comment with the @ and then teacher's email address. I am a lazy teacher, and if someone sent me an email saying, "I'll go to page 38 and fill in a form," I'm not going to do that. However, if I get tagged and all I have to do is click on that and it takes me straight to the place, I've got no excuse anymore. I'm going to fill that in right away. We used Google for our assessment and our standard classroom approach. And then what we did at the heart of that, we put in staff training. So we developed our own in-house staff training and our own in-house CPD that was run by us based on what was working well. Every single member of staff in the building, again, not just teachers, TAs, therapists, admin staff, all have that approach and they all get that training to help them be able to use the tools properly. And when I say we're a one-to-one Google school, that is all of our students, all of our staff, all of our TAs, all of our admin staff are all on Chromebook Pluses. So it really, really helps drive that forwards, that everyone has one way of working.
Incredible. And I would never say lazy, Peter, efficient. You just found a very efficient stream to something. So you've got a really robust strategy from, training, adoption, to like reviewing the impact of your staff. What about your students? How do you get your students using Workspace and finding the sort of the impact for themselves?
Yeah, so we actually pay for very few other educational packages apart from Google Workspace for Education. We're actually on the Plus license because it's got some amazing features. Things like Google Docs and Google Slides are really core to what we do. Having work set, so Google Slides is probably our main way of setting work. That's because we actually have very little differentiation between the presentation a teacher gives at the beginning of the lesson and work that's set for students. Everything that we show at the beginning is then set for our students. That enables a really lovely cycle in the education process that allows them to go back over that input, especially if there's things like video involved, and then be able to go back over it and consolidate their learning on their own terms before moving on to work. Work being available on Google Classroom has really lowered that cognitive load, that cognitive burden, because students don't have to worry about what books do they need, what bag do they need, do they need to carry everything around with them. It's all in one place and they know where it goes. And actually, just on a really basic, we're a very small school with very little space, and we just sort of thought the other day, it's been a game changer just having one Chromebook instead of 8 books for every student. Like, it sounds such a simple thing, but it's never really thought about. And not just carrying it around, but the storage of all of that work and all of that old work becomes so much easier when you're using something like Google Drive to store it all centrally.
Absolutely. And there's also even more continuity, isn't it, in being able to like track your work and see how you're progressing. So again, very human centric. It's all about what makes it, more facilitated and easier for your students to engage with learning. How do you use Google's products to guarantee accessibility for your students? What does that look like?
So we're going to move on to talk about voice typing and screen readers and the accessibility features that are built into every Chromebook in a little bit. But the thing that really keeps it together is Google Classroom. I often think that we get looked at as a school that does accessibility amazingly, and then it actually gets us overlooked at how much we've got those core products involved and integrated within our systems. So as I said, Google Classroom, every single piece of work that is set in the school has to be set on Google Classroom. And that is so if someone needs a screen reader in a subject like maths, they can access that work still. It's still on there. They can use the screen reader to interact with the questions, even if they're still writing the answers in a book. The real things that we focused in on were voice typing and screen readers and the overlap between those things. It really knocked down barriers for learning. And then we started to structure that. And we'll have a look at that structure and what we've termed technology diets a little bit later on. But that really made every student's approach to learning really personalized and really student-centered in their approaches.
Amazing. So it's safe to say accessibility was like the core reason that you chose your Chromebook. So, and really easy to toggle on. I have them toggled on as well, someone who's dyslexic. So what are the accessibility features that your students use? How do they know to use them?
So again, training. We train all of our students how to use it, and we've actually started a digital legends program this year. So our students are starting to train the new students how to use things. I'm not going to say it's perfect yet, but we're definitely on that road to making it happen. But again, because all of our staff are completely trained, all of our TAs, all of our support staff, all of our teachers, it means that every teacher can help improve students' usage of these core tools to what we do. So if we're looking at voice typing, that is built into both the Chromebook itself and into Google Docs. If we're looking at the screen reader, Google Docs, if you have Plus, now has a lovely, very fluent reader built into it. But the Chromebook itself has a screen reader built in that you can use on any product. So it just really allows them, with that little bit of knowledge on how to turn on the accessibility features, really empower students to push the way they want to learn at any given point.
Amazing. And I'm so excited that we're actually going to be hearing from one of your students. So I have the honor of introducing said student, Mason, who's going to talk to us about the impact of technology on learning for him. So Mason actually, underwent a brain surgery when he was very young, which meant that he missed out on a lot of school. And then coupled with his dyslexia meant that, school became really challenging and a place of just a very negative experience until he got to Abingdon House. So before getting to Abingdon House, he was told that he was likely not to get GCSEs and so on. And all I will say as a little teaser to his impact and his progress is this is Mason speaking at Google events for us, one of them in front of over 200 Senkos from across the UK, a very welcoming, but nonetheless, tough crowd. So Mason, really lovely to have you on here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how mainstream school was for you before you got to Abingdon House?
Yeah, so before I got to Abingdon House, I was at mainstream school for the majority of my life, and I always felt something was missing. I always felt like I was the problem because I couldn't do the work. I couldn't catch up. I was always behind. The class had to wait for me. I didn't have to wait for them. Everything was in paper, everything was in books, and there would be times in lessons when I would come into class, had to find my book, and then look through it and thinking, what did I even write? I really struggled to read my own handwriting and to read others' handwriting. There would just be times where teachers would ask, do you want to read it out to the class? Or do you want to mark someone else's work? And I would say no, or I couldn't do it because I couldn't read my own handwriting, couldn't read anyone else's handwriting, and people couldn't read my handwriting.
Amazing. Hearing you start with, I felt like I was the problem, that makes me so sad. So that was like everything, the whole environment, wasn't it? So what was it like for learning? How did you feel about learning?
I felt like I couldn't engage properly. Even though I tried, even though I was good in school, I felt like I couldn't engage with the subject, couldn't engage with my peers or teachers, because I didn't really know how to. I felt like I was completely different from everyone else. I felt like how I was the one who would just be told to do something else instead, or I would always pick the least difficult work, and I would still struggle to do that. There was times when I had my earliest exams, and I would cry, I would struggle, and I wouldn't be able to do them. There was a time that my highest grade, and this was my highest grade in school, was a 1, just because I just guessed the question. They used to give giant tests, which was all reading and all comprehension. And because of my dyslexia, I couldn't read the first word. So I had no idea what to do. I couldn't have any help. And I just really struggled with all the exams, and I didn't take my SACs. So that's why the comments about how I couldn't take GCSEs was because I didn't take any SACs. So I felt like I was just put in a box already when I was so young, and I was told these are the things you can and cannot do.
So that you've actually said something so powerful there. So you were labelled, you were put in a box, and that just sort of created even more mental barriers, I guess, to being able to feel included and being able to access your learning. So what changed then for you when you got to Abingdon School?
When I got to Abingdon, I think I was in the mindset that this will be different. This will be new. This is what I'm going to do, because I originally thought that I was just going to be doing life skills, and I was quite happy with that. So I thought, oh, this would just be a nice change of pace. And then I got there, and there was a new laptop, and I never used laptops before, because I remember my old school didn't really have IT lessons. I can't barely remember them if I even did. So I was really not experienced with any sort of Chromebook or laptop or typing. I think it was a bit easier than writing, but it didn't fix the problem. And then I started having training one-to-one sessions with a therapist to learn how to use screen reader and learn how to use voice typing, and that's when it started to take off. I remember it took me quite a while, maybe a couple of weeks or so, but after that I started to actually understand it more, starting to use it more. I think I saw myself that my work was increasing, what I was saying was increasing, and I was able to actually do a huge part of work when I wasn't able to before.
That's amazing. So it makes you said you didn't use a Chromebook or a laptop before, and just being given one didn't have an impact. And you mentioned using voice typing. Do you mind telling us a bit more, like how did that change things in terms of learning and what you were able to do?
Well, I always knew, like the quote says there, I always knew that I had all the words I need to say in my head. I know how to say them, I just can't spell them. And that's how it was for most of my time at school. I felt like I had these words I can say, that I want to say, that I want to use, but I could never use. So I felt like I was just like really making my sentences more dumbed down, or words that are easier to spell, which would just ruin the whole context of the sentence. But when I had voice typing, and when I use voice typing, I feel like all the words that I know, all the vocabulary that I can use is there to be used. It's there to be used and to help me grow. Is to help. I feel like with voice text, my vocabulary has improved, my spelling has improved, and my reading has improved, because I'm actually starting to recognize words. I'm able to pronounce words better. I don't know if Mr. Reed will remember this. I had a stutter in year 7, a really bad one. And I felt like with voice typing, my stutter was starting to go, because I had to really concentrate and actually had to pay attention to how I said words. And that helped my way of speaking. It helps my stutter and actually helped my rate of speaking.
It wasn't until recently you reminded me that you used to have a stutter. I genuinely completely forgot that you used to.
Very transformative. And something else you've become really good at, Mason, is being able to think about your thinking and think about your learning, which is called metacognition. So you've got these really high order skills because you've been thinking about, how am I using this tool to say what I want to say and achieve what I want to say. So you've mentioned the voice typing. What else did you use?
I also use screen reader. I use screen reader a lot. I would use them together. So if I would be using voice typing, I would use screen reader to check my writing, and then I would go again and again until I actually find it suitable and I actually prefer that sentence or that paragraph or even that giant piece of writing. In every exam, I remember I used to give myself 10 minutes to go through all my words, and I was able to do it multiple times, and it did work. I used it in every single lesson. Like, I would always be having a laptop and a headphones with me at all times, so I can actually use my different tools. I also had a arrow thing, which always let me see where my arrow is, because I used to get my arrow really lost. I just like that. I just want to say it. One of my favorite tools as well. I used to forget where my arrow is, but I know where it is now.
Amazing. And Mason, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And so just by listening to you talk and you telling us that you arrived with a stutter and you're speaking so fluently and clearly now, what else did voice typing help you achieve?
Helped me choose my exam results.
And what exam results are those, Mason?
Oh, they're not GCSEs.
What did they say about the GCSEs?
I wasn't going to get any.
Well. So talk to us about your GCSEs.
Twice.
Talk us through them.
Well, I took my maths twice, actually. I took my maths a year early and I got a grade 4. But then after that, we thought actually trying to attempt it again and get a better grade. So I then took my maths again, got a 6. And for my English, I got a grade 5, which I think I was very over the moon about. I didn't think I'll get a grade 5. Then I also got all of my BTECs. I got level 2 in IT, level 2 in arts, and a bunch of other subjects I got qualifications in. So my qualification was done to about a very long list. When Abingdon sent me all my qualifications, it came in 2 separate different times because of how many there were.
Phenomenal. What a story of triumph. And Mason, if you could give advice to all schools, right? You have your moment now, you're giving advice to all schools. What would you advise them in terms of supporting their students?
I have a non-serious and a serious one. My non-serious, get headphones. If you want your children to use these tools, that's all great. But if you just expect them to grab your laptop and have it close to their face and shout at their laptop, that's not going to work. Serious advice is, I think all teachers should try to get to know their students more. Try to understand them. If you can actually get to know your students on a personal level, understand what they need, what their goals are, what they can and cannot achieve, you can help them set actual goals that take them out of the box they're already in. If they do not have that help, it's going to be much harder for them to actually do the work and to actually use the tools that they need. It's all good giving them that tools, but it's no use if you're just not going to encourage them to use it. If they feel encouraged, they will do the work. They will go beyond their actual limits and they will enjoy their education experience more.
Phenomenal. And this is, I think, my quote of 2026. Encouragement is the only way to let your students grow and learn. Phenomenal story. Thank you so much, Mason. And for those of you watching, we do have in the deck a little interview with younger Mason. You can see him here, wee Mason, talking about when he first had access to Chromebooks. So if you want to have a little look into more of his journey, please do watch that later on. So Mason, super inspiring. Peter, none of this would have been possible without you and you being able to really tailor your strategy to what Mason's needs are. And you spoke about this earlier on, having like a technology diet. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means and how you use it to empower your students?
Yes, so when we first started looking at this, some of our students were using voice typing. I was going into training other schools where some students were using some accessibility features, but realistically, it was a very scattershot approach in a lot of places. So we looked at how we could actually develop this. Now, there is very little actual research done for non-neurotypical teenagers and young people on the impacts of voice typing and handwriting. There's lots done on adults, especially between the correlation between handwriting and typing, but not so much on the voice typing front and so little on actual students. So we took a step back and we looked at what we needed to do. And that was to have an approach that would help all our students and all our teachers be able to help the students. So we made these technology diets. It was about assessing student need and then tailoring the technology for students' approaches. So at AHS, every child in the school has one of these stickers on their computer. This shows the tools that they should be using to engage in their learning. Now, that's a really important thing they should be using to engage in their learning most effectively. At no point do we tell a student this is what they must use or else. This is an encouragement for them to use their best tools to help their metacognitive process. Because I think a lot of the time at the moment, we're looking at things like universal design for learning, which is brilliant. But sometimes the real students that need that help don't necessarily know that what they need to use. And this is really drilling in on that. So in this example here, we've got tools. So this student would be expected to use voice typing, screen readers, and typing. This particular student would never be expected to use handwriting unless they wanted to. And even then, they might be encouraged to use a method that was more effective. If, for example, voice typing was in bold, that would mean that was their main way of inputting that we would expect them to use all the time. We've got the little icons here for the read-write toolbar and the Google Chromebook functions for where they can find those tools. So a real quick intro. Now, how did we come about this? Well, we started doing what we call a writing sample. On this, we have a look at the students' handwriting, their typing, and their voice typing. The task is a 3-minute sample of each based on an image of the students choosing. That's so it's not a dictation task, it's not a cognitive task, it's just a sample of them writing in 3 different ways. From this, we then dig a bit deeper into that handwriting, that typing, their voice typing, and we analyze their samples with therapists, with teachers, with TAs, and with the student themselves. And we find out the student's best way of working, their most effective way of engaging in learning. And this builds their technology diets. So let's have a little look at some of those samples, because I think this really helps drive home where this can be most powerful. So these are actually Mason samples. So this is when Mason was 15. And this is a 3-minute sample of his handwriting. And from this, I'll actually agree with this old school. That sample of handwriting is not a student that is going to get a high pass at GCSE. Now, a lot of the time when we hand over a computer to a student, we think that's going to fix them. But actually, if we turn off the spell check, we don't see that much of an impact in the amount of words or with the quality of those words. We've got a bit more punctuation. It's definitely easy to read and it's definitely easier to edit. But we're still only seeing 38 words, so only a 3-word improvement. Now, when we move on to voice typing, we just see that massive impact. 163 words, completely grammar and punctuation, all done by Mason. Because he could actually produce his words in a way he could understand it and then go and show those elements of his language use. So, as I said, we've done this with every student in the school, and here's a couple of examples of other ones. The one on the left is an example of some handwriting from a student, that is showing that they just can produce so much more with their voice typing. And side by side, these are absolutely no-brainers. It really shows where the impact is. And again, this doesn't work for every student. So for the example on the right here, there's some beautiful handwriting there, and you may not even question whether that student needed an accessibility feature until you look down and they do nearly double the amount of words typed. This is why we do it with every student, because they might not be aware of how they're working best. Now, this student produced more with their voice typing, but they actually hated it. They stopped using it after 1.5 minutes because they felt like they were having a chat with the computer. So that just didn't work for them. And that just really highlights the difference that we can have with the students and with their approaches towards the use of technology.
Thank you so much, Pete. And I love this is such a powerful example because obviously you're focusing on what works for the student. You're not imposing what you think might work, but also all of that is built into one tool. So it's not using lots of different things. It's just all in one place for them to be able to track. So what impact, and you spoke about doing some studies and understanding impact. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the impact has been on your school, the impact of using assistive technology?
Yeah, so it has been absolutely transformative for some of our students. We've heard Mason speak about how he doesn't think he would have achieved the way he did without this level of technology. And that is the same for a lot of our students. They are in a situation where they have access to this as their standard way of working. So if we think about examination success, students, when we've recently done an impact report with Dr. Fiona Aubrey-Smith, there'll be a link to it at the end. And we found in that students' feedback overwhelmingly preferred to use voice typing over a human scribe. One of those reasons, and Mason can attest to this, is that on average, voice typing, you can produce 62 words a minute. An average human scribe only writes at 25 to 28 words a minute. Also, wow. The impact of this is that this is a student standard way of working, and we do this from at the moment year 7, and we started to roll it back for some individual students as far back as year 3, because we want to develop this as a standard way of working. Now, let's just think there about the independence that builds with our students. They're no longer reliant on an adult for their reading and writing. They can do that themselves and engage in work at their own pace. Academic progress as well showed a 1 to 2% point additional progress above age-adjusted benchmarks in maths, reading and spelling against mainstream peers. So we've had absolutely massive impact for our results. Pupils are highly adept at using their technology devices. This is just a quote that I love from our ISI report in 2021. The students that can achieve, the school has a clear commitment to facilitating pupil progress in the regard of using technology and is thereby helping pupils achieve more. I just love that quote from the school's inspectorate. And if we're thinking about exam results, then we can see the real clear impact that these technologies are having. We have a 100% pass rate at GCSE with a 66% high pass rate at GCSE. There is a wonderful IT teacher at this school. I don't know who they might be, but they've got a 100% pass rate in all of their qualifications. The school as a whole has over 16 subject qualifications now. And nearly in every form of them sitting their exams and sitting coursework, they use their assistive technology or their Chromebooks for typing. They're given the choice, but that enables them to interact with it in a way they feel most comfortable. And we're really seeing success from that.
Congratulations, Peter. Those are phenomenal results. I'm conscious of how many times I've used the word phenomenal, but it's the right word. So, you've had this incredible impact on results, on your strategy, but thinking about going back to Chromebooks for a second, how does the mobility of Chromebooks and the ability to self-manage that cognitive loads support your students in terms of emotional regulation? Obviously, we get a lot of questions around, Chromebooks being a distraction and so on, but how is it actually helping your students sort of manage the day-to-day?
Yeah, so again, a Chromebook can be managed like any educational input. It's behavior management at the end of the day. The Chromebook should be seen, or a computer should be seen, as no different as using a book. And I think a lot of people in their minds see it as something separate. So things like noise cancelling headphones can really help some students block out sensory input. Some of our students work better with music playing, some of them don't. And again, as Mason said, it's getting to know your students and knowing where that's appropriate. However, if we're thinking about things like flexible learning, all the lesson resources are based in Google Classroom on their Chromebooks. So again, we're not worrying about students lugging around massive amounts of books around the building. We actually have, and I hate the term non-negotiables, I genuinely hate it, but in this case it is appropriate. We have a set of non-negotiables in how our teachers set out their work. So they must have it. Work must be set on a pastel background, dyslexia-friendly fonts. We use lots of images to highlight sections of work. That really helps lower cognitive load, and teachers are encouraged to always set out their work in the same way. Again, lowering cognitive load, students know where to find the work. They know where to find any input that they have. And this all helps reduce anxiety towards learning. Students know what's coming. They know what they're going to have. And it really helps a really calm learning environment there. All just done through that one tool that students have.
Amazing. And Peter, as the first ever SEND reference school in the UK, Google Reference School, what advice would you give to mainstream schools who are looking to adopt a much more inclusive accessibility as a standard approach?
First of all, try it. Just give it a go. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Trust your students to use these tools. Also, train your staff, and it's building mindset. All of your staff need to have the mindset that all of these approaches to showing education are equal. We've actually banned the phrase "just do that by worksheet" today. It sounds like such a simple phrase, but actually what you're doing there is you are putting your belief system in doing something by hand is easy, where actually what you're doing there is removing a student's ability to engage in their work. So that mindset of these are all equal ways of showing work and they are all equally important really helps. And to question all of your staff's inbuilt belief systems that they might not even realize they have, and just building that student first approach.
I love that. And in speaking of belief systems, that's really important, isn't it? Like interrogating what you think learning actually looks like. How do you differentiate then between low demand consumption and cognitively active or challenging screen time? There's obviously a lot of concern about students spending a lot of time in front of their screens. And how do you communicate that strategy effectively to the parent community who might be concerned?
So this is something I feel really strongly about. I think screen time is a massive thing in the media right now. The way that I really want parents and teachers to think about this is there is a massive difference between what your students are doing on a computer or a tablet or whatever device they have at school and what they might be doing at home. Those are two separate things. And I'd love to stop using the term screen time when we're talking about educational devices, because not all screen time is equal. And actually, we completely ban free time on the computers outside of a reward time on a Friday. So, which is reward time for everyone. We have that as part of our positive behaviour system. But outside of that lesson, no student will just be using their computer to watch YouTube, to play a game. It's not something that they are there as learning devices. And our students really understand that. We also started to use Google's class tools to help manage lessons. And that is such an amazing tool for locking down Google Classroom and completely blocking access to things that you have not set on Google Classroom. And we're going to probably be rolling it out school-wide soon.
Phenomenal. And you actually have a little bit here on sort of explaining the difference between those three things, like low demand, active cognition, cognitive challenge. Do you mind just quickly taking us through that?
Yeah, so the low demand is the things that you won't be seeing within the school as much. It's leisure activities, passive demand, TV, screen time, basic games. It's the things where students aren't engaged in a learning activity. So they're the things we won't be seeing. The next stage is active cognition. That's where there's a deliberate cognitive activity. So you're creating, you're editing. You might be researching an interesting topic or completing some work. And then you have cognitive challenge. This is where you really ramp up to that really high cognitive demand, where you might be editing or improving something, moving something forwards, multiple interactions over multiple timelines. And this is where we're seeing a lot of our work coming in. The ability to actually engage, edit, and improve your work outside of that one instance. So going back and writing an essay becomes really fluid. There's no need to rewrite because you're just editing, and you can see that whole process in version history. So it's those things there. The low demand is really not what you're seeing in schools, and if those devices are being used properly.
And that brings us on to the next bit on screen time and positive screen time. What do you have to say about that?
Screen time's massively positive. It's simple. Like, again, if we get rid of that term screen time, what Mason has talked about there, I challenge anyone to say that screen time has been negative for Mason. Do you feel that screen time has been negative to you?
Well, do they count screen time as me doing my exams on a laptop then as well?
Yeah. So I challenge anyone to question that idea. We need to move away from that term screen time and be really positive about actually what we're doing with those things. Because if you go back in history, and I used to be a history specialist before I was an IT specialist, and you go back to when women were first being taught to read, people thought it was the downfall of society, but actually it was just different. And like you say that now, no one would ever say that now. And I think that's the conversation we need to be having about moving this forward and pointing out all the positive things we can be doing with this screen time idea. And actually it's just engaging in work in a different concept.
Amazing. And then, so coming up to a close here. So Peter, kind of in line with the question that I asked you earlier on about sort of your advice to mainstream schools or any school really, because accessibility for some is accessibility for all, isn't it? Yeah. So what would you summarize as sort of like the key takeaways for us?
Assistive technology can be just transformative to students, allowing them to engage in a way in work where it is appropriate for them and it is their way of working can be absolutely massive. But also considering that tailored approach. You know, it's not just as simple as giving everyone access to the same things. If we think about the idea of equity versus equality, everyone having the same thing is not the same as students having what they need to achieve and being shown how to use it. So really tailoring that approach and diving in to what is needed. And that technology improves academic performance for students and it improves their behaviour and most importantly, their independence. That was shown in a NASEN study where they found a NASEN DFE study showed that 96% of people involved in a study on assistive technology found improved behaviour in their students because they could actually access the work. And that's what we're doing here is giving students access to education that might not have it in other ways.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Peter and Mason. We speak quite regularly, but I always learn something new every time that we chat. So thank you so much. So we've had some questions come in, and so I'm just going to go with the first one. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. So question one, I think this is both to you from your point of view, Peter, as the digital lead, Mason also as a student. What do you think, which tool do you think has had the biggest impact on your life and why?
Do you want to go first, Mason?
I'll go first. I still have two. I've always been saying screen reader and voice typing because I use them with each other. I can't have one without the other, basically. I've always used screen reader and voice typing together. They've always helped me so much. The reason they've helped me because of my bad dyslexia, and I really struggle with it. If I use all of my speaking with my voice text, I won't be able to read the writing back. So that's why I use screen reader, so I can actually read it back to me.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. I think for me, not one to repeat Mason, but outside of the accessibility tools, Google Classroom has been one of the things that has impacted my approach to education the most. It is such an amazing tool to help deliver and engage in students' work.
And yeah, you can differentiate really easily and also just like discreetly as well, isn't it? So yeah. Sort of maintaining that dignity in learning. Okay, and next question. If a teacher wanted more support on using accessibility tools, where can they go and what can they do? I will actually take you through some of those. But actually, Peter, if you've got any sort of like big takeaways on this, what would you suggest?
A lot of the things we did were self-taught, and I think it's going to be through the tools that are available on Google, but also just fostering that community within your schools and reaching out to those schools that are doing great work would be the place that I'd start.
Perfect. And I think that's it. I think that's all we've got time for. Oh, sorry. Hello, back again. I think we've got one more question, gang. Sorry. Have you implemented any tools? There's more to you, Peter. Have you implemented any tool for screen time control during class time, like any kind of filtering tool?
Yep. So we've got we use Smoothwall as our school-wide filtering tool. It's sort of like you shouldn't be using computers without school-wide filtering, but then on a class level, Class Tools is one of those examples where it really allows you to lock in what the students are doing on a class level. If you haven't used it before, I fully recommend it. Is one of the best tools that I found for locking students into their work on a real micro classroom level.
Sorry, I feel like sometimes as well, if the student actually has the work, they're most likely that they actually want to do the work. I find like if they actually have the tools to do the work, they're most likely actually wanted to do the work instead of go off and do something else on their laptop.
So you don't need a screen time on, and so you just need to make it all engaging, Mason. That's what you're saying. Phenomenal. And then very last one. Sorry. Can students use these features in exams, or do you need something else, Peter? Are you using something else during exams?
No, we're using these tools during exams. And again, I'm not the exams officer for the school, so please make sure you double check everything that I'm about to say with your exams officer. But basically, if you're allowed, if you get access to a scribe already, then you get access to voice typing. If you get access to a reader, then you get access to a screen reader. The difference being, if you get access to a screen reader, you can be in the main exam room with a headset on. You don't need to be out in a separate room with a separate adult. And now I believe JCQ have just changed their arrangements around voice typing to be you can have multiple people in the same room as long as they can't overhear each other, which is a bit of a game changer for that element of using technology within exams. But we just use those. And again, it's more about making sure that this is a standard way of working for students and it's not just sprung on them at the last minute, because they will not do as well as they might have otherwise.
Consistency. Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Peter and Mason. So there were some questions in there about what we can do to support you in using these tools, understanding how to use these tools. So first things first, if you want to learn more about how you can use these tools, so be contacting myself, anyone on my team, and we can walk you through what these tools look like in action across Workspace and Chrome. And then the next thing, at Google for Education, we have so many tools and courses and resources that are available that are free of charge to access. So if you visit the Google for Education Learning Center, you can access things like certifications that take you through these Workspace tools. And then there are some courses there as well that are tailored to accessibility. And then if you go to our Google for Education accessibility webpage, there's even more explanations on settings and more courses and things to do. So, accessibility settings are useful for everyone. So just taking the time to explore what's there for yourself and then thinking about how that can support your students. And then Peter, you have something to share as well.
Yeah, this is a link to our impact report done alongside Dr. Fiona Aubrey-Smith, focusing on everything we've just talked about and the impact it's had on our students. There's great student voice, there's great teacher voice in that. So please check it out. And if you want to get in contact, please feel free to get in contact. Also, a cheeky little plug for myself. I've just been nominated for an EduFuturists Award for Accessibility Champion. So if you like the message that was just given, please feel free to vote for me over with the EduFuturists.
What's mine?
Vote for Peter. Brilliant. Okay, so I think we have gone through our Q&A, so can we skip this one? Brilliant. So upcoming sessions, if you've enjoyed today's content, want to keep on learning with us, we have Creating Classroom Content with Gemini for Education coming up on March 25th. And then we have Beyond the Migration, a simple, standard, secure approach to change management on March 26th. Both really, really, really important pieces on your digital transformation journey. So that just leaves us with thank yous. Your feedback is so important to us and we really want to hear from you. So ultimately, we want to ensure that we're serving you in your education communities and we're making sure that we are creating content that is actually supporting what you do day to day. A huge thank you to our speakers, Peter and Mason, truly, truly inspirational. It's just hearing how consistently you've grown, Mason, has been such a pleasure to watch as well. And thank you all for joining, and thank you for the team for supporting us in creating this wonderful webinar. We are so glad that you could be here with us, and we look forward to seeing you in future sessions. Have a great weekend.